Glass catches his smile as I lift the folded paper, the room cheering while truth tightens in my hand, the walls glowing with candlelit shimmer that dances across the mirrored panels lining the aisle. I feel the weight of eyes shift toward me, a slow turning of bodies coated in perfume and warm ceremony air, all of them expecting another scripted moment in this carefully staged wedding, none of them imagining the rupture that pulses under my skin. My breath steadies as I stand just a few steps from the arch flowers cascading in symmetrical perfection, the scent of roses sweet enough to disguise the sour edge of truth threading through my chest. His smile holds polished, rehearsed bright, but his eyes betray a flicker of recognition, a microscopic crack like the first fracture in a pane of glass. And in that tremor I feel everything align, the contradictions he thought he smoothed over, the pieces he assumed I'd never fit together, the reflection he believed would stay obediently whole. The folded paper warms in my grip from the heat of my palm, though its words remain cold, crisp, and merciless, their edges ready to cut through the vows hovering unfinished in the air. Beside him, Lila lowers her bouquet slightly, her expression touched by confusion rather than fear, unaware of the fault line I'm about to expose beneath her feet. A murmur rolls through the guests, soft but inquisitive, and I catch fragments of whispered guesses, someone thinking I'm about to give a toast too early, someone else chuckling because they assume nerves have pushed me forward out of turn. The officiant shifts uncertainly, glancing between us with a hesitant smile, as if hoping this detour can still be tucked neatly into the narrative of love they've prepared. But the reflection in the nearest glass panel shows the truth. Before I speak, he leans subtly away from me, shoulders tightening under the fabric of his suit, the strain in his jaw barely noticeable, unless you're used to reading people who lie under pressure. And I've spent years listening to voices crack on the brink of truth. My voice is steady because it has to be. Everything that led to this moment has been a buildup of carefully measured breaths, silences I allowed him to fill with whatever story suited him. The floral arch gleams behind him, each petal catching the warm lights, but the mirrored edges slice the scene into sharp pieces. My gaze drifts to the reflection again, studying the way his posture breaks from symmetry every time he blinks, a giveaway he cannot contain. You knew this moment was coming. I say the words low, but clear enough to still the entire aisle. A collective inhale sweeps the room, the air drawing back as if bracing for an impact no one fully understands yet. The folded paper in my hand feels heavier, pulling downward, like gravity has increased under its truth. I shift my stance slightly, my heel brushing the polished floor, leaving a faint echo that cuts through the hush. Lila's fingers tighten around her bouquet petals, trembling as she steps half a pace closer to him, instinctively seeking reassurance, while not yet realizing she shouldn't. He wets his lips subtly, the kind of motion he makes when he's buying time to build another lie. But today time is no longer something he owns. The officiant begins to speak, attempting to smooth the moment, but I lift my hand a fraction higher and he falls silent, eyes wide. I hear the faint hum of the AC unit overhead, the soft shifting of fabric as guests lean in, and somewhere near the back, a camera shutter clicks, capturing the moment the ceremony curdles into something unforgettable. The glass reflection beside him elongates under the angled lighting, stretching his silhouette until it looks like a distortion of who he pretends to be, a visual truth more honest than his smile. My heart beats in a steady rhythm, not frantic, not panicked, measured, methodical, the way I center myself before delivering hard news in the ICU during a night shift, when families gather with hope and fear intertwined. But this time, the news isn't about life or death. It's about betrayal and the cutting clarity of knowing someone trusted your silence more than they respected your truth. I tighten my grip on the folded paper, the edges pressing into my skin, like a reminder of why I'm here, of why I stopped ignoring the inconsistencies, and finally chose to step into the light rather than linger in the shadows of his half-answers. The air tastes different now, sharper charged, as though even the candles anticipate the break in the ceremony's rhythm. My voice rises slightly as I look directly at him, searching for the moment he stops pretending, but he holds the facade as tightly as he holds his breath. Before you finish your vows, I say you should hear what you hoped I'd never reveal. The words land like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward, unraveling the illusion the guests believed they were witnessing. The lights flick across the mirrored panels once more, painting fragments of our faces across the aisle, each slice showing a different version of the truth, one hopeful, one terrified, one finally ready to be spoken aloud. Lila gasps softly, realization beginning to trace itself across her features, her bouquet dipping lower until petals brush the floor. A bridesmaid whispers her name, voice trembling, but the sound is swallowed by the silence swelling around the three of us. He shifts his weight again, a barely perceptible step backward, and the reflection confirms it, doubling the motion, as though even the mirror refuses to let him hide. I breathe in, steadying myself, letting the polished floor, the floral sweetness, the murmuring guests anchor me in the moment I've been building toward. The ceremony cannot go on, not as it was meant to. And I'm no longer the quiet presence he expected to fade into the background. The truth is about to hit harder than the vows he rehearsed. The morning before everything began to split open, I found the trembling key he'd left on the kitchen counter, its metal vibrating faintly against the stone, as though reacting to a frequency only our tension could produce. And I remember the way light slid across the countertop, catching on the stainless edges, before bending toward where he stood near the window, glass reflection bending around him in a way that made his outline look slightly detached from his body, like he was already half in another life. He turned when he heard me pick up the key, his smile warm, practiced familiar enough to lull someone less attentive into believing nothing beneath it had changed. "Thought you might need that for the storage unit," he said, reaching for his mug, the steam drifting upward in pale ribbons. "I'll grab the rest of the decorations there later." His tone was easy smooth, but his eyes didn't linger on me for more than a breath, flicking instead toward his phone on the table screen down, as always. I rolled the key between my fingers, feeling its tremor pulse lightly against my skin, and although I didn't fully understand the unease, yet something in me registered the warning before I had words for it. "When did you go by the unit?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He shrugged, blowing across the rim of his coffee. "Last night after you left for work. Just wanted to make sure everything was organized. My shift had started at 6. He claimed he'd gone after that, but there was a faint uncertainty in his posture, a tiny delay before he answered, small enough to dismiss if you didn't know him as well as I did, but impossible for me to ignore. Still, I let it slide. The fatigue from back-to-back night shifts pressed on me, turning my thoughts sluggish. I placed the trembling key into my pocket, telling myself it was just pre-wedding nerves amplifying nothing into something. He stepped closer, brushing a hand along my arm, the gesture soft but oddly misaligned with the tension humming beneath his elsewise composed demeanor. "You okay?" he asked, voice gentler than necessary, as if trying to anchor the morning in normalcy. "Long shift," I replied, stepping away to turn on the faucet, letting water obscure my expression. That was when the scent hit me, not strong, not obvious, just a faint trace of floral sweetness that wasn't mine and didn't belong anywhere near him at this hour. He noticed my pause, and I felt his attention narrow behind me. "Something wrong?" he prompted. I shut off the water and turned back toward him, studying the clean, calm lines of his face, searching for anything that didn't match the version of him he wanted me to see. "Just tired," I said, the lie sliding easily, because it was partially true. He smiled again, broader this time, stepping past me to grab his jacket. The movement sent a brief shadow sweeping across the floor, splitting the light into angled shards that felt too sharp against my already fraying nerves. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into the way he avoided letting his phone screen catch the light, into the way the key trembled, as though reacting to his proximity, into the faint shift in temperature whenever he entered the room. He kissed my cheek lightly, before leaving, murmuring something about errands and rehearsal dinners, but I watched the door long after it closed, waiting for the familiar sense of calm to return. It didn't. Instead, The quiet pressed in thick and steady, leaving me alone with the trembling key burning a cold, persistent impression in my pocket. I didn't recognize it then as the first signal that truth was skimming beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to rise. I spent the next hour trying to convince myself nothing was wrong, cleaning the counter, rearranging the decorations we'd planned to take to the venue, checking my schedule for the week. But every action felt slightly misaligned, like the rhythm of the morning was off by a fraction. I picked up his jacket from the back of the chair to hang it properly, and the scent clung to the fabric again, faint but distinct floral, with a note I couldn't place. I paused, fingers tightening on the collar. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he brushed past someone at work. Maybe it was detergent. Maybe I was overstretched and imagining things. But the unease refused to settle. I opened the door to bring the jacket to the closet, and the hallway mirror caught my reflection. A woman standing still, holding onto fabric that wasn't telling the truth, trying to ignore the tremor of a key that shouldn't have moved on its own. I set the jacket down carefully, as though not disturbing it might silence the questions building in me, and stepped back into the kitchen. The counter, once glowing with early sunlight, felt colder now, the air shifting subtly. I pressed my palm against the surface, grounding myself, trying to steady my breathing. I had no evidence yet, not then, but instinct stretched like a thin thread between points I hadn't connected. Something in him was misaligned, and the smallest details had begun whispering it. I should have trusted how the morning's quiet carried its warning. Cassie slid into the cafe booth across from me that afternoon. Her movements tight with a kind of nervous energy she tried to hide beneath a casual smile, and before I could ask how she was, she set her phone on the table between us, the cracked screen reflecting our faces in jagged geometry that made everything look slightly off, as if truth itself were already splintering in plain sight. "Mara," she whispered, leaning closer. "I need you to look at something, but don't freak out." The words stirred something in my chest. Not panic exactly, but the quiet shift that happens right before a monitor alarm starts sounding during a night shift, when you feel the rhythm of certainty falter. I picked up her phone carefully, the crack running diagonally through the display like a fault line, dividing the message from its timestamp. And when the image finally loaded, my breath caught, not because it shocked me, but because it matched too perfectly with the unease I'd been trying so hard to ignore. The screenshot, Ref M42 timestamped 10:17 p.m., showed a brief message from an unsaved number. The preview blurred by the fractured screen, but still clear enough to read the implications, someone asking if he was still coming by. I was already on shift at 10:17. He had told me he was home unwinding, waiting for me to text on my break. I brushed a thumb over the cracked glass, the fracture splitting his words into pieces that felt like they belonged to two separate realities, one he described to me and one the timestamp revealed. "Where did you get this?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as possible. Cassie's eyes tracked my reaction, worry nodding in the space between her brows. "It popped up on my feed because someone accidentally synced group photos from last night. I don't think they realized a screenshot was in the batch." The cafe air, warm and heavy with espresso and baked sugar, seemed too soft for the information settling between us. "Who sent it?" I asked. She tilted the phone slightly, angling it under the overhead lights so I could see more clearly. A name hovered just beneath the fracture line, the first letter visible, the rest obscured by the splinter in the glass. He'd deleted messages before, so I knew how carefully he controlled what appeared on his screen. Seeing a message he didn't manage to erase unsettled me in a way I couldn't disguise. "Do you think it's nothing?" Cassie asked, though her tone made it clear she already knew the answer. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving my lungs like it was trying to drag denial out with it. "I think it means he wasn't where he said he was." Her jaw-set lips tightening slightly. "Mara, are you sure you're ready to know what this might mean? Not knowing has been hurting more than knowing ever could." I said, surprising myself with the honesty in the words. I turned the phone over again, studying the timestamp, 10:17 p.m., the exact moment I'd been charting vitals for a patient, unaware that someone else was speaking to him in a way that didn't fit the story he built for us. The crack across the phone split the preview into two halves, making the message feel like it was emerging from underneath, climbing upward through the break. I closed my eyes briefly, summoning the memory of my shift log from that night. The rhythm of tasks, the timing of alarms, the moment I'd texted him, and he'd replied instantly. Too instantly. The recollection tightened the muscles in my arms, and I felt the steadiness of my breath falter for the first time since stepping into the cafe. Cassie reached across the table, touching my wrist lightly. "You don't have to do anything with this yet," she said, "but you shouldn't pretend it doesn't mean something." I nodded, pocketing the screenshot in my mind, storing it in the same place I kept every detail that mattered. I didn't confront him immediately. I needed more than a message. I needed to see how he would respond to something small, something casual, something that should have been easy for him to answer if he had nothing to hide. When I got home that evening, he was in the living room, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "Hey," I said lightly, setting my bag down. "What time did you get home last night again?" Without hesitation, without deviation, without even a flicker of uncertainty, he repeated the exact same phrasing he'd used the morning before, word for word, tone perfectly matched. That wasn't natural. People don't repeat spontaneity with that kind of precision, unless the line is rehearsed. The reflection in the mirror behind him captured the moment too cleanly. His smile held, but something in his shoulders tightened, as if bracing for weight he thought he'd already hidden. The precision of his answer felt like a script he'd practiced alone, not the truth shared between two people preparing to merge their lives. I nodded like everything made sense, like the room hadn't just shifted under my feet, like my pulse wasn't settling into a slower, colder rhythm that warned me denial was no longer an option. He stepped toward me, pressing a kiss to my forehead, unaware that something had changed so subtly he wouldn't notice until too late. As he moved past, the scent trailing from his collar wasn't the warm, familiar one. I knew it held that same floral trace I'd caught on the jacket earlier. Faint but sharp, a signature not meant for me. I forced a steady breath, telling myself this was only the first fracture, the first confirmation that the world I thought we shared wasn't aligned. Fractures deepened fast once I stopped looking away. The venue walkthrough was supposed to be simple. Approve the floral placements, confirm seating arrangements, nod through instructions, but the mood shifted the moment we entered the narrow service hallway, where a flickering bulb sputtered overhead, casting stuttering bands of light across the floor that made every step feel like crossing into a place where truth had been waiting. Staff moved around us in crisp lines, the rehearsal energy tightening the air, and I stayed close enough to hear the coordinator's explanations, yet distant enough to observe him watching how his smile adjusted with each new witness, how his shoulders relaxed only when attention shifted away. The bulb buzzed again, momentarily brightening, before dropping into a dim, pulsing glow. And in that uneven light, I noticed one of the venue staff staring at a monitor on the wall, brows lifting slightly as he replayed a short clip. I shouldn't have looked. I could have walked past as though nothing in my life was leaning toward fracture. But something instinct suspicion, or the quiet dread building in me, since the trembling key pulled me closer. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. The staff member glanced up. "Just checking yesterday's footage," he said. "We had some issues with people wandering into restricted areas." He spoke lightly, but the footage looping on the small screen showed a hallway I recognized, gate number 3. And there, caught cleanly under the flickering bulb's twin overhead light, was Renee slipping past the camera at 09:14, her posture angled like someone who knew she didn't belong there, but had reason to be anyway. I felt my breath stall. The coordinator called for us to gather near the archway, but I couldn't move, not while Renee's silhouette repeated on the screen, her hand brushing the wall as she passed the timestamp, glowing like a confession she never meant to leave behind. He stepped beside me, placing a hand on my back, as if guiding me forward. But I sensed the tension in him, the faint tightening of his fingertips when he saw what held my attention. "Let's go," he murmured too quickly. "They're waiting." His voice was smooth, but the reflection in the monitor's glass betrayed him. His jaw clenched just for a second, before he forced another smile. The staff member, oblivious to our shift in energy, tapped the screen. We've had bridesmaids get lost before, he laughed. But this wasn't one of them. She wasn't on any list. The flickering bulb overhead buzzed louder, as if trying to spotlight the lie forming in his throat. I finally turned to him. "Did you know she was here yesterday?" I asked the words low enough that only he could hear. His pupils tightened, but he shook his head with practiced ease. "No idea. She must have been delivering something for the office." "Then why gate number 3? I pressed, keeping my voice steady as people moved around us, adjusting floral stands and testing sound equipment, completely unaware that the foundation of the ceremony they were prepping had begun to fracture. "That hallway is restricted." He laughed, but the sound rang hollow. "You're overthinking." She probably got lost. The explanation didn't fit, and we both knew it. Still, he walked away before I could push further, leaving me in the stuttering half-light of the failing bulb, its flare and fade marking each beat of disbelief growing inside me. Lila approached, then dress fabric, whispering against the floor as she checked a centerpiece. "Everything okay?" she asked, following my gaze to the monitor. I swallowed the truth, the instinctive urge to pull her into the reality I was just beginning to unravel. "Just checking lighting," I said. She smiled, relieved, unaware that the light itself was betraying him. The coordinator clapped loudly to gather everyone, pulling the bridal party toward the front. Staff, guests, vendors' eyes swept the scene, waiting for instruction. The public nature of the space made my pulse shift, not in fear, but in clarity. This was the first time his lie existed, not in private shadow, but in a room full of witnesses. When he returned to stand beside Lila, the bulb above him flickered again, illuminating his face in uneven flashes, making it look like he was stepping in and out of two versions of himself. And in the reflection on the glossy floor tile, I saw it the split second where he turned toward the monitor. Jaw-tight shoulders braced a man preparing for a truth he hoped wouldn't surface. I approached slowly, controlled. "They have footage of Renee here yesterday," I said quietly. "Any idea why?" His smile tightened. "She works nearby. Maybe she stopped in." "Into a restricted hallway?" I asked. At exactly 9:14, the number landed heavily between us, heavier than I expected because for the first time, he didn't have a ready line prepared. A bridesmaid glanced at us, sensing tension, and I stepped back before she came closer, unwilling to make this moment public without more proof. But the room already felt tuned to the wrong frequency, waiting for something to crack. The coordinator raised his voice again, asking everyone to take positions, and a small collective movement rippled across the floor. The ceremony rehearsal was seconds from beginning. Yet all I could feel was the weight of the timestamp, the flickering bulb, the reflection of a man who wasn't where he said he was, and the presence of a woman he shouldn't have been with. The truth flickered just like the failing light, appearing, disappearing, pushing toward full brightness. He reached for my hand then, but the gesture felt forced, his palm too warm, his fingers curling around mine with hesitation rather than comfort. And though the room was full, though laughter rose from the back row, though music stirred faintly from the speakers, all I could see was the looping footage in my mind, Renee's silhouette slipping past gate number 3 like a secret entering the frame. The lies grew bolder the moment witnesses were near. The night after the rehearsal run, I came home exhausted from another shift, the kind of fatigue that settles into the bones and makes every sound sharper, every detail harder to ignore. And when I walked into the bedroom, I saw his cold metal cufflink sitting alone on the dresser, glinting under the low lamplight, like it had been placed there intentionally, a small polished artifact daring me to look closer. I set my bag down and reached for it, the metal biting slightly with its chill. And for a moment the reflection in its curved surface distorted my face into a warped version of myself, one caught halfway between disbelief and recognition. He stepped into the doorway, then loosening his tie with practiced ease. "You're home earlier than usual," he said lightly. "Slow night." "Steady," I replied, rotating the cufflink between my fingers, letting the reflection blur into unreadable shapes. He walked toward me, brushing his knuckles along my shoulder, as though re-establishing the rhythm we once had. but the motion felt rehearsed, not natural. "You left this out," I said, lifting the cufflink slightly, watching his reaction. He smiled, shrugging. "Must have rolled off the nightstand. I was rushing this morning." I nodded, but I could feel the log fragment burning a hole in my memory. Station 2 code ref. A19 not matching the timeline he insisted upon. "You got home late last night," I said quietly, turning toward the closet to hang my jacket. He followed, his voice warm, but his posture tightening. "No same time as always," he said. "Maybe you lost track with back-to-back shifts." I almost believed him until I caught the faint scent drifting from his collar again. Floral, unfamiliar wrong. And the memory of the shift log aligned itself with a cold, steady certainty. "Your timeline doesn't match mine," I said, still facing the closet, my voice low but controlled. He laughed lightly, but the sound had edges now. "What timeline?" "Baby, you're exhausted. Sit down. You need sleep." He crossed the room, reaching to take the cufflink from my hand, but I pulled back gently, and his expression flickered a small sharp break before he smoothed it over. "Where were you last night?" I asked, turning fully toward him. His gaze held mine steadily, too steadily, the way someone holds a note right before it cracks. "Mara. I told you. Home. I even sent you a picture of dinner. A picture that could have been taken any time," I replied, my tone even. He exhaled through his nose, frustrated now. "Why are you doing this? We're days away from the wedding. Can we not create problems out of nothing?" The accusation pricked, but only because it echoed what I'd told myself too many times already. "It's not nothing," I said. "It's 10:17 p.m. and a shift log you didn't expect me to check." For the first time, his composure faltered, the space between his brows tightening, his shoulders drawing upward by a fraction. "What log?" he asked too quickly. "The one from Station 2, I said. A19 wasn't filed until after midnight. You weren't home then." Silence unfolded between us, stretching thin and dangerous. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You're looking for patterns that aren't there." My fingers tightened around the cufflink, its cold, biting edge grounding me. "No," I said, "I'm seeing patterns you hoped I wouldn't." He turned away abruptly, crossing the room to grab his suit jacket as though needing a barrier or a task. "Look," he said, "I've been stressed. Work is intense. Timing gets messy. It doesn't mean anything. Every inconsistency means something when it's repeated." I answered the words steadier than I expected. He spun back toward me, irritation sparking beneath his practiced calm. "You're twisting everything." "Am I?" I asked softly. "Because yesterday you didn't know why Renee was at the venue. Today you don't know where you were last night. These aren't small things." His jaw clenched, a motion he tried to mask by adjusting his shirt cuff. But I saw the truth ripple behind his eyes, fear not of what he'd done, but of what I'd begun to see. The cufflink felt heavier in my palm, its shine muted now, as though reflecting only the parts of him he couldn't control. He walked past me abruptly, muttering something about taking a call outside, but I stepped into his path before he reached the door. "Jared," I said quietly, "if you want me to believe, you give me something real. Something that doesn't crack under the slightest light." His eyes hardened for a fraction of a second, barely visible but enough. "You're reading shadows," he said finally, brushing past me. "That's all. But shadows don't exist without something blocking the light." And as the door clicked behind him, the room felt colder, thinner, stripped of the warmth I used to mistake for truth. I sat on the edge of the bed, setting the cufflink on the nightstand gently, as though placing evidence in plain sight might force the air to settle. Instead, the silence deepened, pressing against me, with a weight that felt less like fear and more like confirmation. The shift log was just one inconsistency. The scent on his collar, the timestamp on the screenshot, the restricted hallway, each detail stitched itself into a quiet pattern that I could no longer ignore. The lies began lining up like steps he thought I wouldn't trace. I hadn't meant to look through his office, but exhaustion from another shift and the ache of unanswered questions pushed me toward the half-open drawer beside his desk, the wooden edge left askew, as though someone had searched it in haste and forgotten to close it properly. And when I pulled it wider, the faint scent of floral sweetness sharp, lingering unmistakably. Not mine rose like a quiet warning. I could no longer pretend away. Papers rustled as I shifted them gently, trying not to appear like I was invading something sacred. But nothing about this felt sacred anymore. It felt staged, controlled, constructed. "Mara," he called from the hallway, his footsteps soft but quickening. I didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I leaned closer to the drawer's metallic frame, catching a distorted glimpse of him, in its curved reflection, as he stepped into the doorway. The reflection shifted, bending him into uneven lines, just long enough for me to see a hesitation he hadn't revealed in his actual posture. And the moment he realized where I was standing, his expression broke subtly, sharply, unmistakably, before he rearranged it into something neutral. "Why are you going through my things?" he asked, voice calm, too calm, rehearsed, calm. "You looking for something?" I kept my fingers on the drawer's edge, grounding myself in the object before me. "I was just looking for a charger," I said quietly. The drawer was already open. He stepped closer, but the reflection in the drawer betrayed him again. The delay between his first step and his forced smile, unspooled like a frame skipping ahead of itself, a split-second contradiction the real version of him tried to erase. "You never leave drawers open," I said, keeping my voice steady, even as truth pressed harder against the moment. His eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, then smoothed with practiced ease. "I was rushing this morning. You know how chaotic things are with the wedding? Chaotic enough that you don't notice who goes through your office?" I asked, watching him through the reflection instead of facing him directly. The distorted version of his face tightened again, revealing the truth before he could speak. He followed my gaze and subtly shifted his stance, angling himself so the reflection wouldn't catch his expression anymore. "Mara," he said slower. "Now you're doing that thing where you read too much into nothing." "Nothing doesn't leave a drawer half open," I said. "Nothing doesn't carry a scent that wasn't here last week." His breath hitched just once, barely audible, but the reflection caught the movement before his face rearranged into a mask of irritation. "Are we really doing this?" he asked. "Are you trying to pick a fight the week of our wedding?" I closed the drawer slowly, letting the sound punctuate his question. "I'm trying to understand," I said, "but every time I look at you, something doesn't match." He scoffed. "Match what, Mara?" "Your suspicion. Your dreams. You're tired. Everything feels off to you when you're like this." "Then why does your reflection tell the truth before you do?" I asked, the words slipping out colder than I intended. His face drained briefly before he stepped forward, crowding the space between us. "I don't know what you think you're seeing," he said, voice low. "But you're wrong." "Then show me," I said. "Look at the drawer. Look at yourself." He hesitated, not long, not dramatically, just long enough for the reflection to reveal a crack in the facade he'd been constructing for weeks. And as he finally leaned down, the drawer's metallic surface caught the dim overhead light, bending it into fractured angles that sliced across his expression, making his face appear split between guilt and defiance. The motif echo-surfaced unbidden reflection fractures, as truth strains through its quiet inevitability, settling into the air like the sound of metal cooling after being shaped. He straightened abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, stepping away too quickly. "I don't know what you want from me." "Honesty," I said simply. "I've been honest," he snapped. "It's you who keeps twisting things." My pulse steadied, sharpened. "Then explain last night. Explain gate number 3. Explain the scent in your office. Explain why you rehearse answers before I ask." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. But nothing accurate formed, only pieces of sentences he abandoned before finishing. He reached for me suddenly, hands gentle, but voice urgent. "Mara, please. You're imagining things. I love you. We're getting married. Love doesn't flinch at its own reflection, I whispered. He froze the truth, landing with more weight than either of us expected. You're tired, he said again, weaker now, stepping back as though distance might steady him. Let's take a break. We can talk later. But later was just another story he could rewrite, another timeline he could smooth into a shape that suited him. I stepped around him, heading toward the doorway, but paused long enough to give him one last chance. If there's something I need to know, I said quietly, you should tell me before someone else does. He didn't answer. Couldn't. And the silence that followed didn't feel confused. It felt deliberate, heavy, threaded with choices he wasn't ready to confess. As I walked away, the half-open drawer behind me creaked softly, as though exhaling the truth he refused to name. The reflection showed what he thought he could still hide. Detective Vale met me in a back room of the venue 2 days before the ceremony. A space usually reserved for vendors sorting supplies, now dimly lit by a single lamp whose soft yellow glow made every shadow stretch long across the stacked crates and folded tablecloths. The lamp buzzed faintly, its light steady but subdued, casting an intimacy over the conversation that made truth feel closer than I was prepared for. He didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against a metal cart, arms crossed, observing me with the quiet patience of someone who had spent years reading people who didn't yet realize they were unraveling. Ms. Ellison, he said, nodding once, I want to play something for you. Just listen first. No assumptions. His voice held no accusation, but something in it told me assumptions were exactly what he expected me to have. I folded my arms, keeping my breathing measured. All right. He tapped his phone, and the audio clip filled the small room, muffled at first, then sharpening into 2 voices overlapping near a doorway, one hurried, one low. Clip 02, Vale said quietly. Timestamp 07:33. The male voice wasn't completely clear, but the cadence was unmistakable. The tone he used when he thought logic alone could control a situation. My stomach tightened. You hear that? Vale asked. Does it sound familiar? It sounds like someone trying very hard not to be noticed, I said, hearing my own calmness waver. The second voice, the woman, wasn't clear either, but the pitch and softness aligned too closely with another familiarity I didn't want to confront yet. They were seen near the loading dock, right before a minor disturbance. Vale continued. Something fell, someone shouted. Nothing huge. But the witness thought it was strange to see them together. What exactly did they say? I asked, forcing my pulse to slow. He played the recording again, turning the dim lamp slightly so its glow illuminated a narrow path between us. Shadows crawled up the wall behind him as the clip repeated, and this time I focused not just on the words, but on the rhythm between them, the way the male voice spoke quickly, softly, with the same tension he used on me when trying to smooth over inconsistencies. Vale paused the audio and watched me. You know who that sounds like, he said. It wasn't a question. I glanced at the crates, the hanging garlands waiting for setup, anything to steady myself. People can sound similar, I said, though the denial tasted thin, temporary. He raised a brow. Maybe. But this witness described a man in a suit jacket, dark hair, pacing like he was late for something. And a woman with a sharp tone, very controlled, like she was the one giving instructions. Renee's posture flashed in my mind, her assured stride, her clipped voice, when she agreed to decisions she didn't fully support. What were they arguing about? I asked. The witness didn't catch that part, Vale replied, but from the bit you heard it sounds like timing. Or secrecy. He watched me carefully, as though waiting for the exact moment I stopped shielding the truth from myself. I lowered into the lone metal chair, the cool surface grounding me. Why bring this to me? I asked. This could be nothing. He exhaled slowly. It could. But in my experience, people who are worried about nothing don't look like they're about to faint. I forced a breath. I'm tired. That's all. He tilted his head slightly. You're a nurse, you know the difference between exhaustion and dread. The dim lamp flickered once briefly, the glow trembling before stabilizing, sending ripples of shadow across the crates. His eyes followed the motion, then returned to mine with a knowing quiet. The air felt heavier now, thick with possibility. He pulled up the clip again, but didn't play it. "If this is connected to you," he said gently, "you should know before the wedding. Before someone gets blindsided." "Someone always gets blindsided," I murmured, unsure if I meant myself, Lila, or all of us. Vale straightened. "So tell me the truth. Do you think the man in that recording is him?" My throat tightened. I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. The reflection from the half-open drawer, the scent in the office, the synchronized lies, they all circled this moment, like orbit lines tightening around gravity. "I think I said slowly that he's not where he pretends to be." Vale nodded once as though confirming something privately. "Then you should prepare for the possibility that the truth doesn't wait politely." He stepped aside, giving me room to leave the dim lamp glowing behind him, like a warning light rather than comfort. I stood unsure if I felt heavier or clearer and walked to the door. Just before I pushed it open, Vale added, "If you need help before the ceremony, call. Things like this often get worse before they get better." I nodded without turning around, letting the cold hallway air meet me with a shiver that ran down my spine. The dim light from the room spilled out behind me, fading as the door closed, taking the clipped audio voices with it, but leaving their imprint tight in my chest. The witness wasn't the only one catching pieces of the truth. Renee hadn't intended to drop the silver key of that much. I was certain the moment it slipped from her purse and landed on the conference table during the final planning meeting, the metallic ring echoing just sharply enough to slice through the ambient chatter of florists, coordinators, and vendors rushing to finalize last-minute details before the ceremony. The key spun once before settling its surface, catching the overhead light and reflecting a thin, cold line across the tablecloth, and in that quick glint, I felt something in me lock into place, not panic, but recognition sharpened into certainty. She froze for half a second, the faintest widening of her eyes, betraying her before she covered it with a smirk too controlled to be casual. "Clumsy today," she murmured, reaching for it, but not before I leaned forward and caught the scent I'd traced to too many of his lies. Soft floral sweetness, with a crisp, expensive undertone. "Interesting key," I said lightly, watching her fingers hover, waiting for me to move back. "Storage." She smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. "Something like that." Her phone buzzed, then face up, and before she could react, a drafted message flashed across the unlocked screen, Suite 12, 8:30, before disappearing into the Notes app she hadn't properly closed. The timestamp at the top suggested it was written the night he swore he was home early, making dinner, waiting for my call. "That looks like more than storage," I said softly, my voice too even for her to relax. She retrieved the key with a slow, unhurried motion, holding it by the top, as though displaying it deliberately now. "You really shouldn't read into what isn't yours," she said, the corners of her mouth tightening, a warning buried beneath the politeness. I kept my gaze steady. "Does he have a key like that?" Her lashes lifted just a fraction. "You'd know better than I would, wouldn't you?" she replied, the subtle emphasis unmistakable. The room around us continued buzzing, vendors adjusting chairs, the coordinator confirming schedules, the florist testing lighting on centerpieces. But none of them noticed the shift in the air between us. The kind of subtle danger that doesn't announce itself loudly, but presses in at the edges until breathing becomes conscious. "He mentioned you were helping with logistics," I said, as if making conversation. She tilted her head. "Did he?" "Yes," I responded, "but he didn't mention any late-night meetings." Her smile faltered just briefly, like a mask slipping under too much heat. "I think," she murmured, lowering her phone into her purse. "You hear what you want to hear?" "Funny," I said. He said the same thing right before he forgot where he'd been. Her eyes sharpened, the softness gone, now replaced with something colder, more deliberate. "Be careful, Mara," she said quietly. "Doubt has a way of making people see ghosts, and lies have a way of leaving evidence behind." I answered. She didn't turn away this time. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice so the bustling room couldn't overhear. "Whatever story you think you're piecing together," she said, "it won't change what's already decided." "By whom?" I asked. She didn't blink. "Him." The word landed with a weight I hadn't expected, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something deeper. She wasn't afraid of being discovered. She was confident he wouldn't let the truth reach daylight. I stepped back, letting the silver key glint once more in her palm, its shape identical to the one I'd seen her use months ago when she claimed she was dropping off paperwork. The room dimmed slightly as a cloud passed over the skylight, and in that moment of shadow, the tension tightened like a wire between us. She picked up a floral sample and turned toward the coordinator conversation, resuming as though nothing had happened. But before she fully turned away, she angled her head just enough to deliver a final low whisper. "You should focus on your role in the ceremony, not everyone else's." The implication wasn't subtle, and it wasn't a suggestion. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself in the rising clarity rather than the threat. I replayed the drafted message in my mind, Suite 12-830, its simplicity damning not because of what it said, but because of when it was written. It tightened every inconsistency he'd tried to bury, every timeline he'd rehearsed, every denial he'd delivered, with a steady smile. Vendors rushed around me, adjusting table linens, taping cords, moving chairs, unaware that the room had become a stage for a truth unraveling faster than I could contain it. I stepped toward the exit, needing air that didn't feel shared with her composure, but halfway down the hall, I paused, because I sensed movement behind me. She hadn't followed, but she watched from the doorway, one hand resting in her pocket, where the silver key now hid from view. She held my gaze for a beat too long, then offered a small deliberate nod, approval or warning I couldn't tell. Both maybe. The hall lights flickered once overhead, a brief dimming that sent a shadow stretching long across the floor between us. And in that thin moment of semi-darkness, I realized the truth wasn't approaching quietly anymore. It was sprinting. Her message exposed what he never intended me to see. Lila sat before the vanity in the bridal suite, the soft morning light filtering through sheer curtains and settling across her shoulders like a calm she didn't truly feel, and I stood beside her, adjusting the bouquet the coordinator had left earlier, the paper program in my other hand, trembling enough that its sharpened edge sliced cleanly across my finger, a sting so sudden it pulled me sharply into the moment. She noticed the movement immediately. "You okay?" she asked, turning slightly, her veil cascading like a spill of soft light behind her. "Paper cut," I murmured, wrapping my thumb with a tissue. Though the cut felt symbolic, small, sharp, impossible to ignore. I lifted the bouquet again, inhaling the floral blend. She had chosen a delicate mixture of roses and freesia. And as I turned it in my hands, the charm dangling from its ribbon rotated into view. Not the charm he'd described in his story about how they met. Not the initials and date he'd claimed had been sentimental. Instead, the engraving read, LH 1212, each character etched cleanly in silver gleaming beneath the filtered light. "Did you add this?" I asked gently. She frowned. "No, it came like that. Jared had it custom made." Why, I hesitated, weighing whether to spare her or arm her. "He told me once," I said carefully, "that your anniversary wasn't in December." Her eyes narrowed, confusion pulling at her expression. "It's not. We met in March." She reached for the charm, studying the engraving closely. "This isn't our date," she whispered, her voice breaking in the quiet room. She looked up at me, and something in her face softened, not in relief, but in dawning recognition that something fundamental was wrong. "Why would he engrave the wrong date?" she asked, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard. "Lila, I don't think the date was meant for you." The words left me heavier than I expected, dragging the air between us into a taut silence. She stared at the charm again, her fingers trembling. "Who is it meant for, then?" Her voice cracked thin as the ribbon tied around the stems. I didn't answer, not immediately, because the truth landed in her expression before I could speak it. She set the bouquet down slowly, carefully, as if placing something hazardous out of reach. "Has he been lying to me?" she whispered. I met her gaze, and she saw the answer before I said anything. She pressed her hand to her mouth, breath-shaking eyes glistening with a betrayal she was still trying to shape into meaning. "How long have you known?" she asked. The question wasn't accusatory, it was raw exposed. "Long enough that I can't ignore it anymore," I said. "But not long enough to know how to tell you without hurting you." She nodded, staring at the charm, her lips parted in disbelief. He told me this charm was meaningful." "It is," I said quietly. "Just not in the way you thought." She let out a shaky breath. "Who is she?" I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. "Renee." The name hit harder than I anticipated. Lila recoiled as if struck. "Renee?" The planner he kept insisting we needed. "Yes." She reached for the bouquet again, fingertips tracing the engraved numbers as though they might rearrange themselves into something less damning. "What does 1212 mean?" "A time," I said. "A timestamp. At least, that's what it matches." Her breath stilled. "Matches." What I hesitated, then gently told her the truth. The timestamp on the screenshot. Cassie found the message written at the same time he claimed to be with me, the alignment of his false timeline with Renee's appearance. Each detail tightened the space between us, until keeping secrets felt as cruel as revealing them. "He engraved a lie onto something I was meant to carry down the aisle," she said, tears slipping despite her best effort to stay composed. Her voice wavered into silence, and she pressed her palms onto the vanity table, steadying herself as the reflection staring back at her changed. No longer the serene bride, but someone standing at the edge of a truth she hadn't prepared to face. She lifted her eyes to mine in the mirror. "How could he do this?" she whispered. "Because he thought he could keep both lives separate," I said softly. "Thought neither of us would compare timelines." She shook her head, disbelief crumpling the edges of her composure. "I thought we were solid. I thought we were real." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are real. His choices aren't." She looked down again at the charm, then at my bandaged finger. "Did you come here to tell me?" she asked. "Or were you trying to protect me from this?" "Both," I admitted. "I didn't want your wedding day to turn into the moment you realized everything was wrong." "But it already is." She breathed out slowly, a fragile sound. "What do I do?" I knelt beside her, lowering my voice. "You listen to your instinct, and you don't walk into that ceremony blind." She blinked, absorbing the words like they were heavier than her dress. "Will you stand with me?" she asked. "When it happens," I nodded. "Yes." She exhaled, trembling, but resolute enough that something in me steadied too. The bouquet lay between us, the charm glinting like a confession that could no longer hide. The aisle couldn't hold the truth waiting at its end. Rain slicks the entrance steps as guests hurry inside, shaking droplets from umbrellas and sleeves. But when he arrives breathless and flushed, the water clings to his coat like guilt refusing to let go. Each drop catching the aisle lights as he steps toward the arch where Lila and I wait. Her bouquet trembling. My hand closed around the medical log that will end every lie he thinks he still controls. Conversations hush when he enters late enough to draw attention, but still wearing the confident smile he's rehearsed for weeks. His rain-wet coat sleeve brushes against the chairs as he passes, leaving faint streaks of water that trail after him like marks on a crime scene. Lila's grip tightens around the bouquet charm, and she leans slightly toward me. "Now," she whispers. I nod once. The officiant begins speaking, voice wobbling as he senses something off in the tension swelling through the room. Guests shift, sensing the air sharpen. I step forward, lifting the paper. Not a vow, not a speech, but the medical log printed in clean, unyielding black ink. Before anything continues, I say, my voice steady. "There's something the room needs to hear." His head snaps toward me, water dripping from his sleeve onto the floor, his smile freezing at the edges. "Mara," he says quietly, warning buried in the tone. "Not now." But the room has already turned. Lila steps beside me, chin lifting, and the officiant falters mid-sentence. I unfold the paper slowly, letting the action stretch across the silence. Log refers 5NR, timestamp 2204, I say. The moment you swore you were home with me. A ripple moves through the guests, whispers shifting posture, the sound of reality cracking open. He steps forward, palms raised. "This is insane," he says, trying to laugh. "You're misreading something." "Mara, please, no." I interrupt louder now. "I checked. I was at work. And you weren't home. You weren't even close." His jaw clenches, rain dripping from his sleeve onto the aisle runner in uneven beats. "You're tired," he says, confused. "You've been working too many night shifts." Lila cuts in, her voice shaking but clear. "Why is our anniversary engraved wrong on the bouquet charm?" The color drains from his face. A bridesmaid gasps softly. Chairs scrape as guests lean forward. He looks from me to her to the paper, realizing too late that the timeline he'd pieced together has collapsed into a single point he cannot outrun. "Lila, I can explain." "Then do it," she demands, holding up the bouquet. "Explain LH 1212. Explain why you had another woman's key in your office. Explain why you met her behind gate number 3. His eyes widen at that last one, a tell he can't mask. "That's not what happened," he stammers, voice rising. "You're twisting everything. You're being manipulated. She's manipulating you." "She," I echo. "Renee. The woman you met in the loading dock, according to witness clip, O2 timestamp, 07:33. Gasps now. Someone in the back mutters his name. The officiant lowers his book, uncertain whether the ceremony still exists. He tries to step toward me, but Lila blocks him with the bouquet, her entire body trembling, but resolute enough to split the room's axis. The rain-wet sleeve clings to his arm, darkening further as sweat beads along his collar. "You don't understand," he says, voice cracking. "This is complicated." "It's simple," I say, raising the paper. "This is where you really were." I read from the log, the alarm incident, the nurse shift confirmation, the exact moment he wasn't where he said he'd been. His eyes dart around the room, seeking someone, anyone who might soften this into something survivable. "Mara." He tries again. "Stop. Please, don't do this here. You did this here," I say. Long before I ever spoke. The weight of it lands. The final truth, unsoftened, undeniable. Renee appears at the edge of the room, then frozen halfway down the aisle, as every head swivels toward her. Her expression flickers shock calculation, then a poise she can't maintain, under the fluorescent truth hanging in the air. Lila stares at both of them, her breath trembling, the bouquet charm glinting like a verdict. "How long?" she asks him, voice brittle. "Have you been lying to us?" He opens his mouth, but no sound comes. The silence grows dense, suffocating, prying him open in ways he cannot control. The water on his sleeve drops faster now, gathering at his cuff, dripping onto the floor. He whispers, "Lila, I'm sorry," but the apology arrives too late, too incomplete, too rehearsed to mean anything. She steps back. I do too. And the aisle once meant to lead toward a promise becomes a corridor of consequence he now has to walk alone. The vows collapsed under the weight of the truth he couldn't outrun. The room did not erupt all at once. It fractured slowly like a mirror splintering outward from a single point of impact, and in the aftermath of the truth-drop, guests stood frozen in the aisle, some whispering, others staring at him as though seeing his shape for the first time. When Lila stepped back from him, bouquet trembling, the ribbon loosened and the charm clinked softly against a fallen centerpiece, and I saw a small mirror shard near the reception arch, reflecting the fractured scene in sharp, uneven slices, her trembling hands, his pale face, the stunned rows of witnesses whose expectations had collapsed into disbelief. He reached toward her with both hands, rain still dripping from his sleeve, leaving small dark marks on the polished floor. But she recoiled instinctively, the movement swift and decisive, cutting through the stagnant air. "Lila, please," he said, voice breaking under the weight of everyone watching. "Let me explain." She shook her head, tears streaking the corners of her eyes as she backed toward the nearest chair. You had months to explain, she whispered. Years even. But you didn't. She wasn't shouting. The softness of her tone made it worse heavy, with a grief too real for theatrics. Renee lingered near the back, half hidden behind a pillar, her expression flickering between guilt and stubborn denial. But the mirror shard caught her face too, refracted, angular, exposed, in a way she couldn't mask. "Stop lying," Lila said, her voice shaking, but certain because everyone sees you now. A murmur rippled through the guests, sharp enough that he flinched. He looked toward me, next desperation pooling in his eyes like someone drowning in their own unraveling narrative. "Mara," he said, stepping forward. Tell them. Tell them this isn't what it looks like. You know me." I held his gaze steady, unwavering. "I do know you," I said. "And that's exactly why this looks right." The blow landed visibly. Something in him wilted, a collapse in posture, a slackening of tension that dragged his shoulders downward, as though every lie he'd balanced was finally crushing its architect. "You misunderstood," he tried again. All of this, every piece taken out of context. Lila let out a breathless laugh, disbelieving. "The wrong anniversary on a charm you claimed was meaningful. Messages at 10:17, secret keys meeting Renee behind gate number 3. And you still want to call this context?" A groomsman turned away, muttering something under his breath. A bridesmaid blinked hard, fighting back tears. Even the officiant looked stricken, book lowered to his waist, as though unsure whether he should step forward or step aside. He reached out again, but this time no one moved to meet his hand. The silence stretched. "Truth doesn't vanish when you refuse to look at it." I said the words steady as steel. He swallowed hard, throat-working eyes darting between me and Lila, and the cluster of guests whose whispers were no longer soft. The mirror shards shimmered on the floor, reflecting his face in fractured geometry, a broken symmetry he could no longer hide behind. Renee finally stepped out from behind the pillar arms, folded tightly across her chest, chin raised with brittle defiance. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're letting jealousy ruin everything." Lila's head snapped toward her, grief flashing into something sharper. "Jealousy," she repeated. "You slept with my fiancé, engaged fiancé, and you're calling me jealous?" Renee opened her mouth to respond, but Vale emerged from the side aisle before she could speak, his quiet presence filling the room with an authority that stilled the murmurs. He didn't intervene. He simply watched, arms crossed, gaze locked on the unfolding consequence, as though waiting to see which truth would settle last. The pressure increased until even the air felt tight enough to splinter. He turned toward Renee, then desperation bleeding through his composure. "Say something," he begged. "Tell them it wasn't like that." She inhaled deeply, eyes flicking to the mirror shard on the floor, the reflection slicing her expression into uneven parts. "I'm not taking the fall for you," she said quietly. "Not when you told me she already knew." Lila's breath stilled. Already knew what his face drained of color. "I never said that," he whispered, voice cracking. Renee laughed once, short, humorless. "Then you really are a better liar than I thought." The guests gasped as if struck by a physical blow. Chairs scraped. Someone muttered, "My God." He shook his head violently, stepping backward, colliding with a chair that toppled behind him. No, that's not. This is out of control." He looked at me again, desperate. "Mara, help me. Please." I exhaled slowly. "You built this," I said. "Every contradiction, every hour, you weren't where you said you were. We're just standing in what you made." His knees buckled slightly, as though the truth were something physically heavy pressing down on him. He reached toward the arch for support, fingers grazing the edge before slipping. The mirror shard near his foot reflected the moment in brutal clarity. Lila collapsed into a chair, bouquet slipping, Renee backing away, guests staring, me standing motionless as everything he'd hidden erupted into consequence. The officiant closed his book quietly. The ceremony was over before it began. He finally saw the wreckage he thought he could outrun. The reception hall is almost silent now, hours after the chaos dissolved into scattered conversations, hurried exits, and the kind of stunned quiet that follows when a truth detonates in a room, and people have to decide which pieces belong to them. I stand near the mirrored panel where everything first cracked open, watching the last staff members fold chairs and sweep petals into soft piles, their movements unhurried, respectful of the tension still lingering in the air. In the glass reflection beside me, the room looks calmer than it feels, softened by dimmed lights and the faint shimmer of the candles that survive the evening. Lila sits a few tables away, veil removed, shoulders wrapped in a shawl someone handed her. She holds the bouquet charm loosely in her palm, turning it between her fingers, as though mapping out a future unburdened by the lie that was supposed to accompany her down the aisle. When she looks up, there's no accusation in her eyes, only recognition that we both walked through the same breaking point from different angles. "Thank you," she says softly, barely lifting her voice above the rustle of tablecloths, "for not letting me walk into something blind." I step closer, pulling out the chair beside her. "You deserve the truth," I tell her. She nods, wiping a stray tear from her cheek, her breath steadying with each small motion. "It hurts," she admits, "but it's clean hurt. Not the kind that drags you in circles." I understand that more than she knows. The glass near us reflects a softened version of the room, framing the aftermath without magnifying it. One shard still lies near the arch from earlier, placed carefully on the table by a staff member who found it. Even broken, it catches the light in a way that feels strangely resolute, as if insisting that some things become clearer when fractured. "I thought my life would start today," she says quietly. "Maybe it still will, just not with him." I sit with her in silence, letting her decide the pace of whatever comes next. Outside, the rain has stopped, leaving streaks across the windows that make the city lights wobble in gentle distortion. The air carries no perfume now, only the faint scent of extinguished candles and damp fabric, unburdened by deceit. She fingers the charm once more. "What will you do now?" she asks. I consider the question carefully, feeling the weight of the past few weeks settle into something clearer. "I'm not sure," I say. "But I think letting go of him was the first honest decision I've made in a while." She smiles, faintly tired, but genuine. "You deserve better than being someone's second truth." The words land softly, not as comfort, but as a fact I should have recognized earlier. I glance again at the mirrored panel, watching the room shift in its surface, the way chairs angle imperfectly, the way petals cling to the corners of the floor, the way the light catches in small glints. And I realize in the quiet that follows that glass holds the final shape of truth, not because it never breaks, but because even broken, it reflects exactly what stands before it. "He tried so hard to keep everything split," I say. "But truth doesn't stay in separate rooms forever." She exhales long and steady, releasing something she'd been gripping tightly. "No," she says, "it doesn't." In the doorway, Vale pauses briefly, offering a nod. Acknowledgement, nothing more, before heading out into the cooling night. His presence lingers like a subtle reminder that accountability doesn't end in a single conversation. Renee is gone. She slipped out during the height of the collapse, not meeting anyone's eye, her confidence dissolving into something hollow and hurried. And he left after the crowd broke apart, shoulders slumped, coat still damp from a rain he could no longer blame for the weight dragging him down. He didn't say another word to me, not that it would have mattered. Lila rises slowly, smoothing the fabric of her dress, her movements deliberate, grounded. "I should go," she says. "My sister's waiting outside. If you need anything." She touches my hand gently. "I know." She slips the charm into her pocket, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of a truth she'll never misread again, and walks toward the exit with a steadiness she didn't have earlier. When she's gone, I return to the mirrored panel once more, letting the reflection settle into clarity. The room is nearly empty now, just the remnants of what could have been, and the quiet of what is. I breathe deeply, letting the cool air fill my lungs, without the tightness that had become familiar. For the first time in weeks, my body feels aligned with my thoughts, no longer contorted to accommodate someone else's lies. I touch the edge of the glass, gently feeling only smoothness beneath my fingertips. No fractures, no distortions. Just the present. Just the truth as it is. The night settles still and clean, and I turn toward the door with the calm that comes from knowing I didn't look away. The ceremony may have fallen apart, but clarity finally held. And sometimes that is the only thing worth carrying out of a ruined room.